This is Coromon, a retro-style RPG that is going for the classic creature trainer style, i.e. Pokemon, and of course with the inconsistent quality of recent Pokemon titles, I always like to see indies taking a stab at it, because a lot of these people are people that grew up with the classic Pokemon games, and they want to see it brought back to that, or at least in that style, but with some new, fresh ideas sort of injected into it, and that is exactly what this is. It feels very much like a sort of GBA to DS era Pokemon game, but with some new blood in it as well. So it's definitely got that classic style, but it's got a lot of newer ideas, some quality of life changes, a very customizable difficulty options, some very nice detailed sprites, and some other things like that bring it bang up to date while also having that sort of retro feel to it. And just to skip to the end real quick, I think this game does a really good job of what it actually sets out to do. I think it is actually pretty fantastic when it comes to recreating that classic Pokemon feel, while also having an identity of its own that isn't just, you played a Pokemon game once, this is kind of like that. It's a little bit more than that, and it actually has a relatively good story, in my opinion, that is, again, sort of a callback to older school Pokemon games and their campaigns and how they tended to work. And I think that it takes a bit of courage to sort of try and call back to those games, because they are extremely beloved games, and anytime you're talking about a Nintendo property, or at least a property currently owned by Nintendo, you're talking about a very rabid fan base. So obviously trying to go back to that is basically throwing yourself into a pit of vipers, and then hoping that you can find the ladder. But in my opinion, I do not think that confidence was misplaced with Coromon, because it's recognizably a classic creature trainer game, while still smoothing out some of those more modern quality of life things and adding some nice difficulty options and things, and having a good identity unto itself. So it's actually a very confident entry, in my opinion, into the idea of an indie creature trainer RPG that does pretty much everything it needs to do really well. The plot is pretty simple but nicely involved as you go on. It involves gathering the essences from these things called Titans, which are almost like gods, really. They are vastly powerful Coromon that act as the various bosses throughout the game, and of course you'll be going through various route-like areas and finding various towns and lots of trainers and things along the way, and you will of course be expected to eventually train up your own team of up to 6 Coromon and use them to face off against the various increasing threats as you go on. And there are several types of Coromon in this, but this is one thing that differs right off the bat from the Pokemon formula, in that of all of the types that are available, there are several types that are move-only types, which is an interesting bit of balance change from how this type of thing normally works. Like, for instance, let's just go with Ghost, because Ghost is my favorite Pokemon type, and it's pretty much my favorite type in here as well. Ghost is weak to itself. Ghost, it is also weak to the Magic type, which works a lot like Psychic in Pokemon. However, although you can find loads of Ghost-type Coromon to join your team, you cannot find any Magic-type Coromon, because the Magic type is only on moves. So mostly you're talking about other Ghost types that learn Magic skills, and of course using the replacement for TMs, which are called Skill Flashes, to flash new moves like Magic-type moves, for instance, onto some of your other creatures in order to give them more flexibility. So this means that the overall type matchups probably work a little bit differently than you're used to, because it's less about a large variety of types of different Coromon on your team, and more about a large variety of move types on those 6 Coromon. Because some of the types are only on moves, you're expected to sort of teach them and have a variety of different things available, so you're probably going to find that move variety and overall attack variety on your creatures is actually more important than their individual types in a lot of cases, especially when you're going against certain bosses who have very specific weaknesses that may or may not actually be types that you can even find. So it's all about move variety, and I think that's kind of cool, actually, because, I mean, move variety has always been sort of a point of contention in Pokemon games, right? Some people like to have as many different moves as possible available. Some people like more cut-down, attack-focused move lists, like what's in Legends and some things like that. But regardless of which style you like, I think it's a really neat balance shake-up idea to actually have several types exclusive to moves instead, thus making you want to get a wider variety of them. The replacement for Pokeballs are called spinners, and you will find a wide variety of different spinners, from the normal silver and gold ones that are just sort of like great and ultra balls, effectively, normal, great, and ultras. And you've also got a lot of other types that do different things, like heal spinners that completely heal and restore whatever you catch in them so that you can use them immediately without going to heal. Or things like type-specific spinners that are very good at catching certain types. There's even one called a trick spinner that is best used at the very first turn of combat to try and catch something very quickly. So this part of the gameplay is very much what you're used to, and of course Coromon themselves do have 4 moves available to them, as you would also expect. However, there's another big change in that you don't have PP, the points for each move. Instead, every Coromon has an SP gauge, and each move depletes a certain amount of this SP. This does not restore on its own in combat, so you have to be wary about using too much stamina when you're fighting. This is kind of a neat idea because, again, it changes the overall balance dynamic, and it adds another stat for you to worry about because everything that a Coromon can do uses this one pool of SP. If you want, you can feed them cakes, which are like potions and things, to actually restore stuff like health and SP. They also restore a certain amount of SP after a battle is over, but not a whole lot, so you do have to actually be careful about how much you're using. And if you run out or start to run very low, you can rest at any point in battle to restore half of that Coromon's SP, but it does take a full turn to do so. Overall, this means the pacing of the game is quite aggressive and fast because you are not expected to be in a battle for a very long time because you'll start running out of SP very quickly. So it's more about buffing yourself or debuffing the enemy in a very effective way to down them with as few attacks as possible so that you don't run out of SP a couple of battles down the line and have to use a bunch of your consumables to restore them and things. So yeah, this is all about sort of aggression and tactical use of resources. One little quality of life change regarding the moves that I really like is that you can go to your Coromon's summary in the pause menu at any time that you want to, and you can actually see all of the moves that they can learn in one big list and swap them out from there. So you don't have to worry about move relearners or anything like that. You just can see exactly what levels they'll learn all of their moves, including all the moves that you haven't unlocked yet. You don't know what they are, but you can see what levels they'll get them. And then you can just deactivate and activate any 4 of these that you want at any time so that you can swap out move sets for all of your Coromon to have whatever moves you think would be best right now. And I think this is a really fun change because of what I mentioned earlier, the idea of move variety, because of those move exclusive types. This matches with that mechanic very well because it means that you can easily swap out everything that a Coromon can do at any given time with whatever else they've learned and all of the moves that you've flashed on them so far from consumable items and things. So it's a good fit for the way the rest of the game works, and it's an appreciated quality of life change as well. While you're exploring around, you also have a couple of different options that give the world a little bit more interactivity. You have a Gauntlet, and this Gauntlet is what you use to actually store and throw your spinners full of small monsters at innocent passersby, but it also has several functions in and of itself that you'll unlock as you go through the story. It'll start with a simple stink function that's like a stink bomb that you can use in any patch of grass that will make Coromon not attack you. So if you're trying to get back to a center to heal or something and there's a really long patch of grass in the way, you can step into it and use this, and now you can go through it with impunity, knowing that you won't get attacked. Some other modules you can unlock, though, are things like the push, which allows you to actually push logs and rocks and movable objects around. This is used in various puzzles and also to get various treasures and things in the world, especially in the big dungeon areas. You can also get a burn module that allows you to actually burn down hedges and grasses and stuff to get to areas you couldn't previously get to. And there's even an aroma module, which you can also use in patches of grass like the stink module, but instead of making it to where things won't attack you, it actually increases the level of things that do attack you. That allows you to catch higher level Coromon than you otherwise would be able to, and also get more experience than you otherwise would be able to since you'll be fighting higher level foes. I really like this feature because it adds a little bit more interactivity to the world, and it also means that the puzzle variety in the game in terms of the routes that you can access, and especially in terms of the dungeons that you'll be in, can be increased in complexity and more interesting stuff because you have all these other ways to interact with things other than just a simple interact button. And on that note, I've noticed they've made a very big effort to ensure that every area of the world has its own sort of mechanics that are unique to it in theme and in its mechanical execution, which I think is a really good way to do it because it means it's hard to get bored when every new area doesn't only have new Coromon to find and catch, but it also has entirely different mechanics to interact with than the previous place you were in. The starting area, for instance, is quite simple and doesn't have a whole lot of interaction because it's basically the tutorial first area, but we'll eventually have some block pushing puzzles and the like to get through, and eventually you'll get onto more complicated stuff like a bit where you have to transform into a ghost and collect wayward spirits, to a bit in a desert where you have to watch out and be careful not to be on the sand out in the sun for too long because you'll overheat and have to restart at the beginning of the area, so you have to duck between patches of grass, which of course will get you in battles more often but will keep you cool, and in areas of shade like underneath tents and things that allow your heat gauge to go down. So I think it's a really neat idea that they've made pretty much every area of the game unique, not just in terms of its theme, but they've also carried that theme into gameplay to mean that every area and dungeon you go to is going to have something you didn't expect. It's going to have something new for you to do. One thing I mentioned earlier is the difficulty options of the game, and that's because there's actually a lot of customizability to the difficulties. There are the classic, like easy, normal, and hard difficulties, but there's also a lot of granularity, a lot of things you can turn on and off individually to form a custom difficulty, which I think is super cool. It has various options from things to make your life easier, like healing on level up, for instance, to making sure you can choose a new Coromon every time an enemy trainer pulls out a new one as well, to stuff that makes your life harder, like only being able to use these centers to heal all of your Coromon a certain number of times per center, or things like nuzlocke rules. Actually, there are built-in nuzlocke and randomizer rules in the game. So you can have stuff like, auto-releasing a fainted Coromon, or making it to where you can only catch the first one that you find on every new area and things like that. So there's a ton of different difficulty options in this game, although I think there's one thing that's missing, and that's an EXP share option in the easier mode menu. There are some items that allow you to share EXP, like the lazy gems and some other stuff, but there is no option to automatically share XP to everyone at once, like a full team-wide XP share, and I feel like that's the sort of thing that would be an obvious choice to put into the make things easier menu. But aside from that, I think it's got a really nice selection of difficulty options, and I love how customizable it is. There's also the potential system, which is a completely new idea. Every Coromon actually has 2 experience gauges. The first one is just your traditional level experience, but as they gain experience, they also gain in this potential gauge. And when it maxes out, you actually get points that you can put into any of the stats manually that you want. So you can actually steer the growth of your Coromon point by point, which is awesome. And it means that some of the other stuff like IVs and things are all kind of built into this system instead. And in fact, it also seems to be built into the whole idea of like a shiny system, because there are actually 3 different sprite palette colors for every single Coromon, and the different colors denote different levels of potential. So there's the normal one that just gains a normal amount of potential, and then there will be a potent one that looks a bit different and gains more potential, so you will, over the levels, have more points in general to add to their stats. And then there's perfect, which is very rare and is basically like a shiny, and it will have a vastly different color palette to it, and will gain its potential much faster, allowing you to steer its growth much more. So that's the general gist of Coromon. It is a really good, I hesitate to use the word Pokemon clone because that kind of makes it sound like it doesn't have a personality of its own, and it actually does. It's got a lot of charm to it. It feels very comfy. It's a very comfy game to play, and I feel like there's actually enough to the story and enough to the various creature designs, which are quite good in my opinion, that they could easily make a sequel out of this if they wanted to. I think there's enough mileage in it to do so. There's a good amount of depth to it because of the various typings and the various move-only typings and the potential system and all that sort of stuff, and all the various bits and bobs that you can do, like the various sprays and the different fruits that you can give them and other held items. There's a lot here, and it's actually quite a long game as well when it comes down to getting through all the areas and the dungeons and their bosses and things and training up your team. So there's a lot to like here, and I think it does a really good job of being this style of creature trainer that has enough of its own merits to stand up on its own, instead of just, it's like Pokemon but on PC, so there's no other alternative. Since there are alternatives now like Temtem and some other really good games, you gotta do more than just be Pokemon on PC, and I think Coromon actually manages that. It's a very easy recommendation for 20 bucks. I think you'll definitely get $20 worth of enjoyment out of this, and then some, because of the length and variety of the story and its areas, as well as the depth of the actual monster training aspect. And if you get it before April 7th, you can actually get it for 20% off, so it's only like 16 bucks. It is definitely worth that easily. So this has been Coromon. I will link you to the Steam store page in the description down below this video if you want to check it out yourself. I definitely recommend it if you're a fan of these creature training RPGs like I am. And thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you next time.